Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Robert Conley to talk about his Majestic Fantasy RPG, the Kickstarter that he launched. Rob, when did you launch this Kickstarter?
I launched it at the beginning, the first week of August, and it will conclude just after Labor Day.
And so we want to talk about that. And Rob, for those who don't know, he's a game designer. He is kind of known for I don't know. I think of you as like the king of sandbox play. Like if I am struggling with an issue that's come up in a sandbox campaign, I go to one of your books or I go to your blog, and I look up. Like, you have a very extensive series of articles on.
Yeah, I got a few opinions on that.
Yeah. So I'm going to call you the king of sandbox here, and we're going to talk about that. But first, why don't you just tell people about the Majestic Fantasy RPG basic rules?
Okay, so for those you who don't know, I have a few books that I got published with Necromancer Games, or I got one part of one book published with Necromancer Games, the Waterlands of High Fantasy box set, and then I had a couple books published with Goodman Games, another Judges Guild remake called Thieves of Madagascar, and then my own stuff in the Points of Light, which are settings. Each book had Points of Light book has 4 settings designed for a sandbox campaign, formatted like the Judges Guild Waterlands of High Fantasy, but they don't cost you an arm and a leg to get, and you get 4 of them per book. And then I started publishing my own, and the one and I was lucky in that I got a license from Judges Guild to use some of their Waterlands material, because for 40 years, whenever I run a fantasy campaign, I use a setting that I call the Majestic Waterlands, which is started out as the Waterlands of High Fantasy. Then my maps were out, and so I decided to redraw them, and when I redraw them, I decided to quote, improve them with all the ideas and stuff that was happening in my previous campaign. And it was that point where it kind of became its own thing. Similar geographies, some of the names are the same, but it's more Game of Thrones than the original, which is more swords and sorcery, like Fitzliber or Conan-esque. And then I continue building on there. So
now, can you just clarify, when you say more Game of Thrones, do you mean grim, or do you mean like more grounded in history?
More grounded in history, more about, a lot of my adventures arose from the clash of politics and religions and culture, because when I started, I was known as the referee who let players trash his campaign. Oh, you want to be king? Okay, well, it's not going to be easy, but let's hear your plan. And a lot of players had decent plans. So we put it into play. There were some reverses, some setbacks, but by and large, most of them stuck it through, and they became a king. They carved out a realm. And then I got the bright idea, okay, so that campaign, Brian got to be king of Nome. All right, so I'm going to make that part of the background for the next campaign. And which was funny, when the player realized that I was doing that, they said, wait a minute, you're using the stuff I did in the previous campaign? Yeah. Oh, I'm not going to mess with my realm. Because because one of the challenges I throw them was that, NPCs who were adventuring parties of the adventurers of their own tried to mess with the player, and the players had to deal with them. So this kept going on until I redrew my map and it became the Majestic Waterlands, and so that's how I became, the sandbox, king of sandbox, as you described me as. And then
I don't think anybody's got as much written material as you do on the like that. That has got to be.
I think Coven Crawford's up there, and there's a couple other guys that are the Land of Nod is another one.
But I mean, in terms of your advice that you give on your blog, that is a very deep layered series of articles.
Well, I think I appreciate that, and I'm definitely up there. But there are others who try to do the same thing. Um, so the points of light that I mentioned were sort of like my Majestic Wonderland, but with the Judges Guild serial numbers filed off. And then I lucked into getting a license, so that saved a lot of work. So I wrote a supplement, and I figured, okay, I didn't just want to write a setting supplement, describing my setting. I wanted to make it immediately useful, so I threw in some rules and I chose to use Swords and Wizardry, which was a clone of the original edition. And
do you know which just so people understand which edition, like of the
of
which...
the world's most popular games?
Okay.
I cannot use because of Section 7 of the Open Game License.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, my mistake.
Cannot cite compatibility without a separate trademark license.
So
hence the uselessness of the original edition of the world's most popular role-playing game.
And that extends to even talking, on the internet and not just like the cover of the book and everything.
I don't know, but do I chance it?
No, that's fair. That's fair.
I'm on a podcast to market my rules, so it's marketing. But
I guess it would still be. You're right. It would still be marketing. Yeah, I haven't had to contend with the open license, so I'm kind of curious about it.
You're kind of like make your own system kind of guy, so.
And so I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but so this is
okay.
The Kickstarter is a
it's primarily rules focused.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a basically, so when I came out with the Majestic Wonderlands 10 years ago, I didn't stop there. I kept on using those rules through several campaigns. And I kept adding more and more stuff, tweaking stuff. And about 5 years ago, I realized I had a complete system here. And even then, I didn't really want to jump into making my own system, but I'm not in distribution, but I do sell to game stores. I do sell physical copies at conventions.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys at Fraud God Games and Swords and Wizardry, the fact there are Autric books available out there, that's all fine and dandy until you realize you're selling supplements to a game that you don't have the core rule books to sell as also. You just can't make it work.
Okay.
When you're selling physical copies. On the internet, it's fine. But so that tipped me over to say, you know what, I need a set of rules to go along with the setting material that I'm writing.
I get you.
But, and I know this is a bit convoluted, but again, I also well aware that if you go on Drive-Thru-RPG and check out the OSR category and the core rules, you see there's at least 100 complete system, and a lot of them are damn good systems. And so I was thinking, if I release this as a core rule book like everybody does, I'm just going to be another guy in this sea of 100. I'm going to have fans, but then I realized that when most people run campaigns, they take it from like one set of rules, Swords and Wizardry, Autric, Old School Essentials, but then they add other stuff from other systems to make the game that they want.
Yeah.
So I figure I can get my stuff in the hands of a lot of people if I'm like the default choice for that other stuff.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is release my system as a series of supplements. Like the first supplement I'm working on is called The Lost Grimoire of Magic, and that would detail magic users, spells, and all the stuff I did with magic user, plus a short adventure, some setting. But once I get done with those supplements, if somebody wants to use them as a system, there's nothing that ties them together. So that's what this Kickstarter is about.
Okay.
I am coming out with a basic set of rules from levels 1 to 5 that has all the elements of the larger system, the Majestic Fantasy RPG, but it presents it as a complete whole. And it will be about 140 to 150 pages when it's done, depending on how the art shakes out.
Mm-hmm.
And So if somebody gets all the later supplements that I'll be producing, they will have a one place they can see how it all works together.
Okay. And are you going to continue with like levels 6 through 10 and
Or
things like
yeah,
that?
the supplement, like the magic supplement, I'll tell you, it will
Hmm.
have all the magic user classes, and they
Okay.
will go level one through, and I think they go to infinity, but they effectively cap out at 16, level 16, because of the older edition style
Okay.
leveling.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
So
Okay.
there's
So.
going to be one for wizards, fighters, rogues, because I don't use the classic edition thief.
Mhm.
I use a variant that I made, and I call them rogue classes. And the one that's in my basic rules is called a burglar, which is like a thief, but they're more competent than a classic edition thief. Let's just say.
I like burglar. I used burglar in one of my little PDF supplements when I tried to make a like more old style fantasy type thing. I think it.
Didn't you play a burglar in the playtest?
I might have. I might have. I might have a gravitation towards that word in general. Um, but yeah, I remember we did the one that where we did the YouTube video where we recorded it.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I think so.
Yeah, the Siege of the Rusted Lord.
Yeah.
You
Uh,
played a noble's son or something like that.
yeah, I think so. I kind of remember now. That was a lot of fun. Um, Now, what does the book kind of contain for 1 through 5? Is it gonna it's gonna have classes and things like that in
Yeah, it
there?
starts out, explains the six attribute. It has classes.
Uh-huh.
Then it goes into what I'm calling background, which are for this, because I only have a limited amount of pages,
Hmm.
they're effectively racial backgrounds: elf, dwarf, half elves, and stuff. But I know there's some recent controversies over the use of the word race and the idea of race in fantasy RPGs, but I have been, for me, I've always used the idea that you might got a race, but races have multiple cultures.
Hmm.
So a dwarf of Hammerguard Keep is not the same as a dwarf of Cockbot. Some of their physical attributes are the same, but some of the more cultural details and things that come along with that are different. And so I don't get in a whole lot of detail in this book about that, but just to be consistent with the later supplement, I called it background instead of race. And
Okay.
in my introduction, I'm up front. These are just racial background. And then I have abilities, which is what I use for skills. And I call them abilities because, in the spirit of the original edition, um, any character can attempt any skill. Because in the original edition, you described what you did, and your referee made a ruling, because all you had stats mechanics for was combat or spellcasting.
Hmm.
Or in the case of clerics, you could turn undead, and that's it. So, but players could sneak around, they could try to knock out a guard, they can climb walls, they can weave a basket if that's what they needed to do, but all characters were equal in that regard. When you read the accounts of the earliest days, it was more about what the imagination of the players and what they thought they could do. And sometimes the referee would say, well, if you have a high dexterity, some things are easier, like sneaking around, than if you, and some things are easier if you have a high strength. So I came up with an ability system, which is very straightforward. You just roll a d20, 15 or better, you succeed. You only need to roll, though, if you're in combat or some situation with significant failure. I explain in the book that I assume that even first level characters have a measure of competency. For me, first level means you just got done with your apprentice training. So you have
Okay.
your initial batch of whatever, if you're a magic user, cleric, fighter, or rogue. I mean, if you're a fighter, your first level means you got out of basic training. You're capable of being in an army and fighting in formation, which are not trivial skills. So the ability system reflects that. So when you add your bonus from your attribute and the ability bonus that you get with your class, you find that you have about a 50-50 shot even in a stressful situation, in one or two abilities like stealth, climb wall, locution, haggling, and the rogue class, the burglar that you played. Those classes are all about being better at things other than combat and spellcasting. So as a burglar, you had Ledgerman, which allowed you to pick locks really well. You had stealth. You had climbing. Those kind of skills make up the burglar. In the later supplement, when I get into expand that, there are other rogue classes like merchant adventurers, which focus more on haggling and being a merchant, going out to dangerous territory and making the deal.
And so the abilities section, those are, I just want to make sure I understand, those are class skills or those are general skills that everybody...
Those are general skills that anybody can do.
Okay.
So anybody can stealth, anybody can pick locks, except a burglar is better at those things.
Okay. And so you got the abilities. Is the book going to have the spells, or is that going to be in the later supplement?
No, this book is going to have levels 1 through 3 for the spells.
Okay.
Everything that you need to run levels 1 through 5 will be in this book.
Okay.
Nothing omitted.
Okay.
Once beyond level 5, you need to go to the supplements.
Okay, I got you. And you said
I have magic items. I have monsters. And I even have 2 chapters on referee advice. One of them is, I think, would be very interesting. But I think both of them are interesting. The first one is about ruling. I'm sure you heard the phrase "rulings not rules" being thrown around in relation to the OSR.
Yes.
But
yes.
I'm surprised there's not a lot of practical advice on how do you take classic edition mechanics to make ruling. Okay? So that's what this chapter is. How do I use, if I'm just limited to armor class, saving throws, to hit with a D20, attributes, and hit points, okay, how can I use those to, say, to knock a chalice out of the villain's hand because they're about to drink from it and take over the world? How do I, make a ruling to trip a guy or knock out a guard or any number of other things that the rules don't have explicit mechanics for? Mm-hmm. So I go into that and explain how I handle it. So, for example, with the guy with the chalice, you make a normal to hit roll, but in lieu of doing damage, you're going to declare, I knocked the chalice out of the guy. But because it's something bad happened to the guy, he makes a saving throw, because as a mechanic, saving throws are used in the classic edition to avoid something bad happen. Now, traditionally, they're thought of avoiding traps, like a pit trap or a poison gas, or being pricked by a poison needle when you open a lock. But they can be applied to anything bad happening to you. And the nice thing about saving throws is they scale as you level. So they have a component of experience in them. So it makes sense that you're trying to knock a chalice out of a guy's hand. If he is like 1 hit dice or first level, he's not going to have as good a chance as the guy who is 9th level or 9 hit dice of keeping a hold of that chalice. So, I don't go into a lot of a shopping list of rules. I just kind of try to teach people what I do to use those mechanics to make rulings, like that chalice example I was talking about.
Well, and also, I mean, you're the person I went to when I needed advice on that subject. So you're it's definitely your area, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd very much be interested in that. Is that, you said that's one of the sections of the GM chapter?
and the other referee section is about a basic overview of running some of the elements of running a sandbox campaign. I talk about you need to build some locales, some NPCs, and you need to write up a series of plans. Either you pick a handful of NPCs and you give them a plan. What would they be doing if the PC did not exist? And then I talk about setting the world in motion, which is, the NPC. Okay, the NPCs have their plan. They start acting on them. Now the PCs are in the picture. And I talk about how after every session you should evaluate what the PCs did or did not do and alter the plans in accordingly. The plans are not like a set of railroad leading into the future. They're more like a battle plan. And the best generals use their battle plan as a structure, and it allows them to be, and the battle plan will have contingency because it will allows them to be prepared, while the worst generals will just rigidly stick to their plan, and that's it. And those lead to defeats. Well, this is the same with sandbox campaign. Yes, you sort of have a idea if the PCs weren't around, this is what's going to happen to the future, but you commit after the end of each session to altering these plans in light of what the PCs do or don't do, and then the next session builds on that. There's another alteration. So by the time you're at the end of the campaign, things are completely different. Well, I also talk about building up your bag of stuff, which is, if your players decide to go left instead of right and you're not prepared, how you handle that. So I touch on that. Because it's just the basic rules, I don't go in tremendous amount of details, but I give you a general structure where I think people buying the product can build up. So I talk about, picture in your mind a peasant house, and now add one or two variations of that in your head. So the next time the player goes into the village and they decide to check out this peasant house, you have something in your mind that you can just pull out and use. And it can be in paper, it can be in your mind. And then after the session, if you think that's going to be visited again, then you can just take the time to make it something more unique and then put that in your notebook. But that's the basic gist of the chapter, where I go in more detail of some of the things I wrote about on my blog and bring it together as part of a systematic whole.
What always struck me about that and your general attitude towards it is the emphasis on NPCs, actually, and I like the language I used to use to talk about this was living adventure, because I first heard that in the Feast of Goblins module for Ravenloft, where you had all these NPCs that were supposed to have goals and be trying to achieve them, and they were supposed to adapt and change what they did depending on what the players did, and so you were intended to treat the NPCs just basically like they were PCs. Do you know what I mean? Just kind of, doing what they had. So I always call that living adventure. But what you described sounds very similar to that, where it's because I think most people, when they think sandbox, I think the image that comes to mind is a hex map for obvious reasons. But sometimes people get stuck on the hex map and forget about the characters, and it is sometimes maybe an impediment to people trying sandbox, because they don't realize that it's that it can be very fruitful in terms of interacting with NPCs and role playing and a lot of this other stuff that you were talking about, where like the players in your campaigns were allowed to destroy the setting. Do you know what I mean? Because they could contribute to it. And so I don't know. I don't know if you have any additional things to say about that, but I do.
I mean, I call it the blank grid, the blank hex problem, because it was the Waterlands box set team that coined the term sandbox campaign. The idea of sandbox predated what we did. I'm not claiming we invented sandbox, but we gave it a formal name. And we did it because we needed to explain why the hell you would buy this $70 box. But the mistake we made is we kind of emphasized you could start in this village and just explore the map and see what's there. Mm-hmm. So people literally took that as the definition of a sandbox campaign. And then within a couple months, we started getting reports of all these more campaigns were failing than succeeding by doing this. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't have this problem. And then, a bunch of us were chatting, and I'm not claiming I did this, but I was definitely one of the people who realized that we realized what these people were doing was not quite what we did as a group. We don't put players in the middle of a blank hex grid. Instead, we do put in the players in the middle of a hex grid, but we describe what's without them or what's around them. We give them a handful of rumors to start with, and we make it relevant to something that they said, I'm interested in doing as my character. So if a fighter says, I'm interested in fighting in the arena, well, we would plant some rumors about the arena and gladiatorial schools and all that. And if a magic user said, I'm interested in researching forgotten spells, well, we would incorporate that into the rumor, as well as have totally random stuff happen. So it's from there is when we started to talk more about World in Motion, the Bag of Stuff, and we all came up with related but separate terms for it. The other thing I want to point out, the sandbox is just not about, it doesn't have to be about exploring the map. There's another type of map, and that's what I call the social map. Just like in life, the inhabitants of a setting form a web of interpersonal connections. That is something that can be explored. Who does the village chief know? Who does the baron know? And who are the baron's enemies? And who are the baron's allies? And that, if you can't go crazy about it, because in life, if you try to map the social web of, say, just your school, it just gets crazy big really quick. So you kind of try to limit yourself to about a half a dozen things at each step of the way. But the thing about doing the social web, in addition to the map, is that I find that players a lot more, they get invested more when it's about other people, other NPCs. I call it the soap opera effect. And they want to continue while exploring the map, kind of a niche taste. But if you get them if you can describe an interesting situation with an interesting group of NPCs, that generally gets everybody every time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I noticed that a lot when I ran more modern settings where physical exploration is less. It's kind of harder to do the physical exploration, and so I would lean more on like you said, the social map.
Sure.
And then that carried back into my my fantasy games. I think you covered most of this, but I want to ask this question just because in case there wasn't anything in there that you covered in the answer you just gave. But aside from all that, are there any other misconceptions about the sandbox that you want to address?
A lot of people, especially if they read my how to make a sandbox, thinks it's a lot of work, and it can be. I mean, you're detailing a world, and you got to be prepared for your possibility that the players not just go left or right, but forward, backward, northeast, southeast, and it gets overwhelming. Well, to that I'd say, keep your list of stuff to the number that you can handle. If it's only 3 items, then it's only 3 items. I think you're going to need more than 2, so I think 3 is about the minimum, but you don't have to make 12. If you only have ideas for 4 things, then stick with that. Just make them 4 interesting things, and don't worry about that, about that, and just be flexible. That's the thing about what I try to do is, if you trash I'll let you trash my setting all day long. I'll handle it. I don't. Sometimes in the worst case scenario, I'll say, look, can we end the session here? I got some work to do to handle what you want to do next.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I'm able to keep it going to the end of the session and then do the work afterwards. But yeah, just if you're intimidated by the scope of it, then narrow the scope. Focus on a smaller area, a smaller number of NPCs. Do what's comfortable for you.
Well, and what you just said there too, I find that if people are worried about the extra work that Sandbox might present to them, letting players trash your setting is one of the things that actually reduces workload, because you don't. For me, at least, I notice when I allow that to happen, I excuse me, I feel like the work is being done for me because I'm not the one generating the adventure as much anymore. It's kind of the players who are now giving me material that's a lot easier to spin new complications to. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
So
and you find that creativity. Okay, so you make. So, for example, in one of my campaigns, I made this place called the Majestic Fastness. It's like a mega dungeon, and it was a dwarven underground dwarven city taken over by a dragon. And I had a lot of fun building it, and it was this elaborate structure and so forth. And a lot of people do that kind of work. And, whereas a sandbox, your creativity, you actually get more out if you use cookie cutter things that you just throw in. Okay, here's a peasant house, here's a castle, here's a thing. And it may be the same castle that you used 3 sessions ago, even though it's in a different part of the region, because what matters is the people who live there, okay, the events that are unfolding around it. So your creativity kicks in to think of interesting consequences to what the players are doing, as opposed to, on the more nuts and bolts. But you don't get away completely at that. There are times when they go to a place and it's definitely sitting down there mapping out level 1 of the dungeon, level 2 of the dungeon is what's called for, and have fun with it. But for the most part, it's less is more, so you can just keep, because the players will be more fascinated by the interconnections you create, and that's where your creativity will be going.
Okay. No, that makes sense, I think. I tend to lean more, I notice, like I mean, you've seen my maps, and I do have sort of a hex map approach, largely due to your help, but most of that is really about the social structures that exist within that map. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, your maps have a lot of notes on who is where, who is, basically this group is here, this group is here, this group is here.
Yeah, and I find it's because of what you're saying, because like that, I don't know. For me, that's just an easy way to. That's where I enjoy being creative, but it also it seems to be better fuel for me during a game in terms of having the players have stuff to do. Like there are, like you said, there are places to explore, but a lot of the work that I do tends to be, well, there's this organization and these are the people in it, and this is the group that they're enemies with, and this is the territory they control, and this is what they're trying to do over here. And I find that that's the kind of stuff that players can really key into very easily.
I do something very similar to mine. I have a forest, but I know who's in the forest. And even if it's just a simple list of names, orcs, dryads, sprites, brownies, and treants, and that's enough for me to riff off of that and create an interesting place the players for visit if they actually visit you. And meanwhile, when they encounter something, I'll throw out the same forest clearing battle map or graphic I used a dozen times before. Just the characters are different.
A name can go a long way. A name can go. I had an organization with 87 members in it, and I just wrote out a list of names and statted some of them, and I used the names as like guideposts for when the players actually would bump into individual characters.
And that's an important part of these basic rules. Now, this is something different than other rule sets. So I have a section of monsters, but I have a section that is equally long, titled NPCs. So in that section, I start out. I should have had my table of contents up here. Just give me a second here to fire it up. There we go. So monsters, I have things like giant centipedes, pegasus, skeletons, so forth. But NPCs, I talk about, different rogue types, fighters, magic users. I give you stats for an apprentice magic user, a magic user who's now a full member of the guild, and he's around 3rd level. And then a higher level magic user who's considered a master of the guild. And, the same with clerics. I give 2 types of clerics. The priest of Delaquain, the goddess of honor and justice. I give an acolyte, a full priest, and a bishop, basically, type. And then I do that same for the rivals of Delaquain, the priest of Sarath, who's the dragon god of war and order. And he's known as a tyrant god. And again, define what the acolytes look like, what the priests look like, and they don't have bishop, they have what they call archons, what an archon looks like. And so I go through these, and then I even do these. If you look in the monster section, you won't find orcs, you won't find lizardmen. I put all the, quote, monsters that are capable, have cultures,
Mm-hmm.
which includes orcs. I put orcs, goblins, lizardmen, serpentmen. I put all those in the NPC sections as well. So you have your basic orc tribesman,
Mm-hmm.
you have your orc shaman, you have your orc leader.
Mm-hmm.
He commands a small group of orc, and then I put an orc chief in there, and I do the similar things for the other intelligent monsters as well. So that section does. So what you can do is you can pick these out and say, you can write that list. You have a bandit gang in the forest, so you pick a couple of entries from the rogue section, which has the bandits in there, and then maybe you decide that the chief is a unique character, so you can take the bandit chief I have in there and customize him in the way that you want to customize it, and leave the rest the same, which will save a ton of work for the type of for sandbox campaign and in the type of campaigns you run.
That's really interesting. Number one, that you put like the non-human races and stuff in there or the non-human backgrounds as in the NPC section. But also, I just like when I did Ogre Gate, I did that. I had not quite like you did. I a different direction, but I had a lot of monsters are obviously something that you need in the game, but it's a real pain when you're a GM and you essentially have to make new PCs when the players meet people. Do you know what I mean? To not have those characters available to you in the rulebook can be very very difficult in terms of ease of use. So I think having a whole section like that is really great.
I became determined to add this after I noticed a couple years in of using this swords and wizardries and the house rules I was adding on to it, that I kept making up these cheat sheets that I would use during play, and I would go to prior cheat sheet and pull out the characters I made, tweak one or two, and that became the new cheat sheet for the next. And I was thinking, dang, if I just completely fleshed this out, it would just be like the monster manual except for NPCs.
No, I love that. I think that's a really good use of your monster section. Do you know what I mean? Just making sure that there's plenty of NPCs there. Now, is that are those separate sections? Like there's an NPC section and there's a monster section. Like there are different chapters in the book.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think the NPCs are distinct enough that to intersperse them with the monster will make it confusing for people to look up, because generally monsters are the things you put in for dungeons and wilderness and stuff like that. Granted, you'll find orcs in those same situation or goblins, but by and large, when you create intelligent opposition, you kind of want them separated out so you can go to a place to make your intelligent opposition to find a reference for your intelligent opposition.
The yeah, and again, I apologize. I have a slight cough, and it's getting a little harder to control. But before we head out, I did want to ask you about your influences. Specific to this project, obviously, but in general, like what types of fiction are influence this project? What type of history influences this project? And if there are any particular game lines that were influential in terms of how the kind of game that you knew you wanted to make, just stuff like that.
Sure. Well, the first and most important one is the fact when I was growing up, I liked reading history books, and one of my favorite books to have my mom read to me before I learned how to read myself was the Golden Book Encyclopedia, believe it or not. I just love the fact there were so many people out there, and it wasn't just present day, it was just also back in time as well. And I never lost that interest. But more immediate to what I do now as far as tabletop role-playing game, of course, was J.R. Tolkien, specifically the Lord of the Rings appendices. I just loved them, I just loved reading that. I mean, I loved the books too, but I loved reading that, the sense of history that they gave, and I dabbled in my own. And then one of the things that appealed when Dungeons and Dragons, and I'll use the term because Dungeons and Dragons came out, was it hit me. If I run a campaign, I can write a history and it will be useful. Because it's one thing to write a history for yourself. It's sort of like a leisure time, pastime. It's fun. But what do you do with it afterward? Maybe write a book based on it, like Tolkien did. But, I could tell even at age I wasn't going to be much of a writer. But with Dungeons and Dragons, I could use it. And although I stumbled a few times and did too much of an info dump, I learned to moderate and learned to more look toward the kind of characters. When I write a history, I look into what kind of people are in the history, and that was more appealing to the players. And then that set me on the path today. And then another major influence was Raymond Feist's Machemia series, the Rift War, especially the first 4 books. His Daughter of the Empire series that came right after that was also influential. I didn't really like the Thieves World book, but I like how my friend Tim described the Thieves World book, so that also inspired me. Then later on, Game of Thrones was pretty nice, but I was more influenced by RPGs like Ars Magica. Mm-hmm. That was a huge influence. The way they wove, it wasn't so much the rules, it was how they wove a whole culture of magic user, and they really nicely interleave into Europe. They have a sideways version of Europe that they call Mythic Europe, but the stuff that is influenced by the mage is the same as our own Middle Age. I was influenced by Harn and Harn Master, by the wonderful and more importantly concise level of detail that they had about their setting. Now people, when they look at Harn, think, God, if we had video, I could show you. I have this whole shelf full of Harn material. And how can I learn all that? But actually, when you look at an individual Harn article or even the core book itself, it is very tersely. They get right to the point, tell you what you need what you need to know, and move on. And they kept this for decades on end. The only thing that's majorly different from before is they now talk more about the people as well. Before, they'll give you a name and 1 or 2 sentences. Mm-hmm. Now they'll give you maybe a paragraph about certain individuals. Mm-hmm. And they will also include a sidebar of adventure seeds. But they don't go overboard with it. So today's articles are just even better. And just looking at my shelf here, GURPS, especially the source books, because they condense all the information in a really easy to digest format. Then you can go to their bibliography and read the details if you want. That I can go on for hours about it, but that's pretty much the highlights of it.
Yeah, I think Harn is a great line. I was introduced to it by my business partner, who was in love with it, and it was kind of like you had said that you weren't. What was the series that you weren't into, but through your friend Thieves World, your friend's description of it. That's how I slowly found my way into Harn. Was I got this description of it, and it was very intriguing. And then he gave me what's that adventure? 100 Bushels of Rye, I think.
That's a good one.
It's a really good adventure, and it does so much with what doesn't seem like so much. Do you know what I mean? Like it gives you
a drunk night, a monster preying on the village, and some pissed off barbarian tribesmen.
And it even has this like location that's kind of a dungeon, but it's very simple. It's not elaborate. It's not like you're not saying I'm going to go left or right. It's just like a side view of what's essentially like a if I remember, like some kind of cavern that's in a hill that's sort of a vertical drop down. There's a number of ways to get into it, but
if you tried to go, it's basically a sinkhole but it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top. So you got that problem, and at the bottom is water.
Yes, and it's like a puzzle. It's like a puzzle.
Yes, exactly. And you had to figure out, because that's where the monster laired, and if you wanted to dig the monster out, that's what you had to figure out how to deal with that terrain. It was realistic too. That there are places on our world like that.
Yeah, it was. I really like how they're able to do that with Harn, I think one of the things that maybe is intimidating to people is if you don't know about Harn and you try to get into it, you have no idea where to begin. I think that's the
they remedied that.
Oh, what have they done?
Well, the basic level of Harn is if you're not interested in the RPG, then all you need to start out with is Harn World itself and the Harn decks.
Okay.
The Harn World is like the prose, the articles about Harn, and it explains. It gives you a history, talks you about a lot of details about Harn that you need, and in the Harn decks, it's like the encyclopedia, but each entry is like a paragraph compared to the articles themselves.
Okay.
So once you get those two, and you find out what you like, then you can figure out which articles you want to get. The only caution I have to give anybody looking to get in Harn, it is premium priced. But I gotta say, these guys have been at it a very long time. Their quality has been top notch since the beginning. So, it won't steer you wrong. And even if you don't get into Harn itself, you can maybe buy one of their castle articles and use it in your D&D campaign, your Fantasy Hero campaign, your Fantasy Age campaign, because the Harn articles the Harn setting itself is systemless. So you can use it anywhere, and that's part of the reasons why I got to be good as a sandbox DM, because when I got in a jam, I just reached around and pull out a castle article, maybe rotate the map by 90 degrees, and that's what I used for the location until I got the time to do what I want, to do something else.
They do have a system, though, correct? Because I remember I got...
Yeah, they have the Harn Master system.
Yeah, I have that. I have the Harn Master.
It's a D100 system. It has a very unique combat system. There are no hit points. That you suffer injury, which reduces skills. And the way how you die or have other bad things happen is when you get whacked, you have to make a saving throw. So at first, the saving throws are easy, even though if you get grievously injured, it's pretty tough to make, still tough to save. Mm-hmm. But it's not as tough later on. After you've suffered a couple of or injury, and now you have a huge negative modifier to your saving throw, or even at which point even a scratch could cause you to pass out.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile product, I think. And Bushels of Rye, I think is if you can. Is that still available, or is that something
Yes.
you have to? Okay, yeah, because I got a really old version of it. I don't know if they've updated it or not, but it was really
No,
impressive.
they have a cleaned up PDF now.
Okay,
They relayed it out, but it's still, when they do that, they kind of keep the same format.
I like the format of the older books actually these days. Sometimes I like to just like I've some products are available as POD now, but you can still get the old books on Amazon and stuff. And if they're not like super expensive, I'll usually go for the ones on Amazon. Though it seems, I don't know, have you noticed that like getting old RPGs is way more expensive than it was just a few years ago?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, like $700 for like old rule books and box sets, and back in I think like is not that long ago, like back in 2008 or 2009, I was buying stuff like that for pennies. It seemed like I bought all the complete books for like 25 cents each at one point. And I think I got like a bunch of 1E DMGs for like $2.
yeah, I know. I'm trying to score a copy of First Edition Arms Law, and I having no luck. My last, I don't really. I mean, I have a lot of RPG stuff, mostly because I never lost any. I didn't lost very much from back in the day, but there are a few things that got busted up or missing. Mostly my 1980s box sets. So when I had my first few success publishing, I started using the money I got, part of the money I got, to buy all the stuff I was missing.
Mm-hmm.
So the last thing I got was I finally scored a copy of the box set of Dragon Quest from SPI.
How much did that cost you?
$45.
That's not too
which was
bad.
reasonable.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
But they have gone up a notch since then, I've noticed.
I mean, I've been really surprised at some of the prices I've been seeing, which I mean, I guess maybe it's so scarce, but part of me is sort of thinking, I know there are a lot of people that are just collectors, and that concerns me, that maybe they've just been scooped up by collectors, and that's driven the prices up.
Well, there's a forum of collectors, and they've been on the ball for years. But now it seems to have, but beyond those guys, there wasn't a whole lot of buzz about collecting. But now the buzz is, it's not just limited there anymore, it's spreading all over the place.
I had a collector buy one of my books at one point because one of the, I think it was Crime Network, I can't remember, but one of our books, when it got printed, one of the printings, somehow there was a weird mistake, and the inside of the book ended up being this 1950s, like, I forget what it was, some kind of sewing book or fashion book on the inside. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the cover was our book. And so apparently those kinds of misprints are very valued by certain collectors. And I heard from this collector that had bought a copy of my book, and he showed it to me. And when the way I found out he was a collector was I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll give you a new copy. I didn't realize that there was a printing error." And he was like, "Oh, no, I bought it because of the printing error." So, there's I think the things that collectors look for are not always the same things that you and me might be looking for when we when we buy games online.
Before we sign off, I forgot there's one other aspect of my Kickstarter I want to mention.
Oh yeah.
So, you play. I don't know if you remember this when you played in my, that Russet Lord adventure, but I gave you those handouts to make your characters with. Those are quick. I am formatting those as a series of quick reference cards.
Okay.
Now these are not playing card size. These are just 8 by 8 inches and 10 inches. I'm using the drive-through RPG card printing facilities to print them out with, and as well as providing a PDF. for people to print them out on home. But the idea is you print them out, you either buy the cards or you print them out yourself on cardstock, and so you start off and hand the players the class card, and you ask them what character class they want to play. Then you hand them the background card, and you ask them which background they want to play, and you also hand them the class card, which on the back will have the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And this way, I found, because what I wanted to do at conventions and stuff, when I ran the adventures like the Russet Lord, I wanted to give players a taste of what it's like to make a classic edition character.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you only have a 4-hour time block. We don't want to waste too much time doing it. Now, because it's based on Swords and Wizardry, initially I was able to keep it under a half hour, with using the rule books and me as acting as coach. But it was a bit of a pain in the butt because I only had 2 rule books and a table of 5 or 6 players. So then I came up with the idea of using these cards, and it went down from a half hour to about 20 to 15 minutes for each player to complete their character. Still, I had to coach, but with the cards, I just had to point out 1 or 2 items, answer a question or 2, and they were off to the races. And so I refined them since then,
mm-hmm.
and now I decided to offer them as a formal product for not only the basic rules, but for any of the other OSR RPGs that have open content like Swords and Wizardry Complete. And after that I will look at Osric, and I'll look at Old School Central. Although for now I'm just focusing on my basic rules, and maybe I'll get Swords and Wizardry Complete done before the end of the Kickstarter.
Go ahead.
That's part of the Kickstarter as well.
Yeah, I do think more people should focus on the amount, like keeping track of how much time it takes to make characters and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were actually tracking the time too, which is,
Oh yeah, I ran. There was a period of time where I went to 4 conventions a year, and I did this for 5 years straight. And I also was able to get, because I had a lot of business trips servicing my company's machine, I usually 2 or 3 times a year I get to go to a game store in some other place of the country, mm-hmm. and able to run a game there. So I started racking up a lot of sessions. So I got a lot of, does this work? Yes. Does this work? No. Does this work? Yes. So I got a lot of practical time in with a variety of people. So I'm pretty confident that people will find this useful.
Okay. No, that's one of the things I like about your stuff is it's very table tested, which it makes a big difference. So we're coming up on an hour, so I think we should end it here. But is there anything else you want to mention? Obviously the
yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so people who know that I publish some Judges Guild material, particularly the reprint of the original Waterlands of High Fantasy with my color maps, as you well know, mm-hmm. And I also, along that, I was given permission to print out a series of guidebooks so that people would have the setting information to go along with that map. Now, due to the unfortunate post by Blob Bloodsaw the second, Judges Guild is no longer widely available. However, prior to that happening, he owed me money for doing those color maps for his Kickstarter, which Judges Guild is in trouble with, mm-hmm. and they're trying to get out of the hole. So I just said, you don't have to pay me the fee for the last my map if you let me sell them on my store. And I offered them to the Kickstarter backers for free. Mm-hmm. And he said yes. And then he, at first it was for royalties, and then he said, just waive the royalties. So until you reach the total amount, you don't have to pay me royalty. And then everything happened. So if you go to my store and buy the Judges Guild stuff, know that none of the money goes toward Bloodsaw II. All the money goes to paying what he owes me.
Okay.
They're going to be up for a while because at the end of first quarter of this year, I was 48% of the way towards what he owes me. Now I'm only 52. I am 52% of the way to what he owes me 3 months later. So it's going to be a while before I take him down, because I'm not going to work with a racist and a guy who posts anti-Semitic posts like he did. And so the moment I have to pay him royalty again, I'll be taking that part of my store down.
Okay. All right. So that's good for people to know. And is there any other things about the Kickstarter you want to mention before we head out, or?
No, and just thank you to all those who backed it, and to those of you who are listening. I hope you decide to come on board. I think it would be worth your money, and it's designed. I am trying to write everything so that it will just dovetail. You can yank sections of it out and put it in your own campaign without having to run the whole thing. So if you like how I handle magic items or spells, just take them and use them for your stuff and enjoy.
And your company is Bat in the Attic Games, right? And that's also your blog, right? Your blog page is it just Bat in the Attic, or is Bat in the Attic Games the blog website?
It's Bat in the Attic. Yeah, it's Bat in the Attic. I'll give you the links.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking out the blog. There's a lot of very useful content there. And so we'll head out, and hopefully we'll have Rob on again. And until next time, we will talk to you later.